This is where my imp keeps track of all the imp quests you've completed. This is where my imp keeps track of all the imp quests you've completed, and the ones you've still to try. This is where my imp keeps track of all the imp quests you've... This is where my imp keeps track of all the imp quests you've completed, and the ones you've still to try. If you're ever short of something to do, just come here, or visit my imp in your home space. This is where my... Here's where you come to customize your imp. This is just a small selection. There will be lots more soon.
Howdy, partner. Cuthbert's always wanted to be a star, so I've cast him and Connie in a drama set in the wild west of the Dreamiverse. But this scene needs a director, and I thought you would be the perfect person for the job. We're gonna use cameras and text gadgets to tell the story of how Deputy Connie apprehended Cuthbert the candy thief. But you won't get far without a camera, so I'll better show you where to get one. Open the assembly menu with the square button, then select Gadgets. Close any open sub-menus with circle, then open the Cameras and Lighting section. Find the camera. The icon is an old-fashioned movie camera. Select it with X. This camera is going to capture our opening shot. See how the gadget has a little camera gizmo attached to it? Point it roughly at Connie, then stamp one with R2 or X. Once you've stamped one, unequip the gadget by pressing circle. Before we look at the framing, there's a few things we can tweak on the camera that'll help us achieve a cinematic look. Hover your imp over the camera, then open its tweak menu with L1 and square. The transition type settings let you change how cameras activate. By choosing different curves and adjusting the transition time slider, you can blend cameras together. But for a dramatic scene like this one, we'll be using the cut transition. It's the button with the scissors icon. The cut transition is instant, so there's no need to set a time for the transition. Below the transitions is the field of view slider. The wider the field of view, the more you'll be able to see with the camera. You can leave it set to its default value for now, but you might want to make adjustments later. Finally, we're going to turn on black bars. It's the button at the bottom. This will put a letterbox on the camera to give it a widescreen look. Move on to the next step and we'll look at framing the camera. Right, let's frame the shot properly. Cameras only activate in play mode and test mode. But we can preview and edit the framing with a simple shortcut. Hover over the camera gadget, then hold L1 and press X. It's just like scoping in. We're now looking through the lens of the camera. But not just looking, we can also edit the camera's position just by using the normal movement controls. If your camera's a little wonky, it's no problem. It'll automatically level itself out if you move it with the left or right sticks. Isn't that clever? Position the camera with Connie and Cuthbert at either side of the frame for their confrontation. Here's another tip for editing cameras. You can use the up and down directional buttons to change the field of view. And you can still use the tweak menu while editing the camera, so you can see the effect of the changes you make. Once your shot is perfectly framed, use the shortcut L1 and circle to exit the camera. We've set the scene. Now it's time for the drama to play out. Move on to the next step when you're ready to start telling the story. The simplest way to show text on screen is to use a text displayer. Open the assembly menu and go to Gadgets. In the Movers and Outputs section, you'll find a handful of gadgets for displaying text and numbers. The icon for the text displayer is two speech bubbles on a screen. Select it with X and stamp one in the scene, then unequip the gadget. A text displayer is pretty useless without text, so let's add some. Open the text displayer tweak menu with L1 and square. On the first page of the tweak menu is a box to enter text. This is going to be Connie's opening line of the scene. Connie has come to Cuthbert's hut to confront him about the stolen candy, so make the line challenging and dramatic. I'll give you a moment to think about Connie's line. Once you've got something, you can move on to the next step. We now have a dramatic opening line, but it doesn't look very good yet. Text always displays middle left on the screen, but while the tweak menu is open, we can grab and move it with R2. By default, the text is pinned to the screen, no matter where the gadget is. You can resize the text with the up and down directional buttons. Move it to the right side of the screen so it's on the same side as Connie on camera. Now let's tweak how the text looks. The first page of the tweak menu has options for changing the appearance of the text. Let's see if there's a more appropriate font. Scroll through the list using the up and down directional buttons. On page 2 of the tweak menu, you can change how the box looks. Find the option for tail shape. Adding a tail will turn the box into a speech bubble. There's a few different tails to choose from. How about zigzag to make it look like Connie's shouting? A positional gizmo appears with the tail, so you can change the length and direction of it. That looks about right. There's plenty more options for customizing the text displayer. Take a look through the rest of the menu and try them out. On the text box properties page, you can make the box more rounded or change its colour. The border properties page lets you change the look of the border or get rid of it completely. You can add a fleck texture to the text box using the option on the texture properties page. When you like how your text looks, close the tweak menu, then give it a test in play mode. The border properties page lets you change the look of the border or get rid of it completely. You can add a fleck texture to the text box using the option on the texture properties page. When you like how your text looks, close the tweak menu, then give it a test in play mode. Oh, something's not right here. My camera's too close to Connie, so when she's possessed, the view switches to the camera built into her controller sensor. I don't want to change the position of the camera, so it needs to be put on a timeline. When you're ready to continue, return to edit mode, rewind time with L3, and start the next step. We have an establishing camera and a dramatic opening line. Now we need to incorporate them into the rest of the scene. On Cuthbert's shed, you'll see there's a timeline surface snapped above the door. The timeline is called Confrontation Cutscene. It contains some more cameras and text displayers. Take a look at the timeline canvas. You can open it with L1 and X. There's a nice little space here for your camera and text displayer to go. Grab your camera in the scene with R2 and drag it over onto the timeline. Don't worry about messing up the shot. The camera gadget will snap to the timeline, but leave the gizmo in position. Now place Connie's text underneath the camera, so they're active at the same time. The time our camera and text displayer are visible is determined by their length on the timeline. So, if you want any text to display for longer, just scale it with the up directional button so that it fills more of the timeline. Or you can lengthen or shorten the clip by grabbing the trim handle on the end of the gadget with R2. The cameras and text displayers will stay in place in the scene, even if you move the timeline. We can't test the timeline just yet, though, because it's powered off. To turn it on, just open its tweak menu with L1 and square. Select the power button at the bottom of the menu to activate it. Shall we take a look in play mode? Wow, what a cliffhanger. The performances were superb, but I think the cameras on the timeline could do with a director's touch. Return to edit mode, rewind time, and start the next step when you want to continue. That was a great opening, but I think we can improve some of the cameras. Make sure you have the timeline open. We don't need to be able to see it, but the cameras will be hidden if it's closed. Fly over to Cuthbert and find the camera behind him. Open its tweak menu with L1 and square and move it to one side. We don't need to tweak anything just yet, but having it open will mean we can use it at the same time as editing the camera. Now scope into the camera with L1 and X to start editing it. When this camera is active, it's focused on Cuthbert, even though he's got his back to it. I think it'd be better if Connie was in focus, and to do that, we need to adjust the focus distance and aperture. Try changing the aperture slider by grabbing it with X. The higher the aperture, the more blurry Connie becomes. But if you increase the focus distance, she'll come back into focus. At high aperture, only the parts of the scene that are near the camera's focus distance are sharp. With a low aperture, even objects in the far distance will be in focus. This effect is called depth of field. It's a nifty technique for drawing the eye of the viewer. We don't want to lose too much detail in the foreground though, so about 30% should be enough. Techniques like this can really help tell a story by directing the viewer's eye to the important parts of the scene. For some extra dramatic punch, you could create a keyframe animation to pull focus so it switches from Cuthbert to Connie. Take a look at how keyframes have been used on the timeline to create the dramatic zoom in on Connie with the third camera. You can learn about keyframe animations in the Keyframes and Timelines tutorial. Look for it in the animation section of the Dreams workshop. Move on to the next step when you're ready to get deeper with dialogue. Text displayers are great for adding captions and titles, but for more complicated conversations, we need a more powerful gadget. Go to the Assembly menu and navigate back to the Movers and Outputs section of the Gadgets menu. In the menu, find the Dialogue text displayer. The icon is 2 connected speech bubbles. Select it with X, then stamp one into the scene. Unequip it from your IMP, then open the Dialogue text displayer's Tweak menu. The Dialogue text displayer is used to create branching conversations with multiple choice answers. The first page has exactly the same options as the regular old text displayer. To continue the story, give Cuthbert a menacing one-liner to challenge Connie's resolve. The Dialogue text displayer has all the same customization options as the regular text displayer. So take some time to edit the appearance of the text. Just as with the standard text displayer, dialogue text is pinned to the screen by default and can be grabbed, moved and resized by the IMP. If you want to use my script for the scene, you can find this dialogue gadget in the tutorial collection. When you've finished writing Cuthbert's dialogue, start the next step and we'll do Connie's replies. Tutorial collection, and can be grabbed, moved and resized by the IMP. If you want to use my script for the scene, you can find this dialogue gadget in the tutorial collection. When you've finished writing Cuthbert's dialogue, start the next step and we'll do Connie's replies. Before we enter Connie's replies, there's a few other options I want to show you. Go to the Settings page of the Tweak menu. Select the button with the elephant icon. This will turn the dialogue into a big gadget. This means the text will be visible on the gadget tile. Now select the next tab, the one with the crossed circle icon. On this page, you can add an option to skip or close the dialogue. The circle button is the default for closing the dialogue text. You can show the prompt on screen by selecting the button with the open eye icon. Close prompts are useful if you don't want a multiple-choice response, like at the end of a dialogue sequence. We want to give Connie some options, though, so head to the Dialogue Properties page. Select the tab with the speech bubbles icon. Here we can create some dialogue options for Connie's comebacks. The different responses can be selected using the controller buttons shown on the left. If you use the same button for dialogue as you did for a close prompt, the dialogue will take priority. To keep things simple, we'll give Connie 2 dialogue options to choose from. Use the text boxes next to the X and circle button icons to give Connie 2 different responses to Cuthbert's challenge. Use the video controls to pause if you need time to write your dialogue. Connie's lines will appear underneath Cuthbert's. Grab them with your imp to arrange them and resize them. When you've got the dialogue how you want it, close the Tweak menu with L1 and circle, then start the next step. The dialogue gadget now has some extra output ports for the 2 button options. Using these ports, we can turn our piece of dialogue into a branching conversation. But first, we'll need some more dialogue. On Cuthbert's shed, you'll find a microchip gadget. Open it up with L1 and X and take a look to see what's going on in there. Here's the rest of the script ready to go. The conversation has 2 branches. In one, Connie tries to arrest Cuthbert. In the other, she questions him about the stolen candy. To arrest the rest of the script ready to need some more dialogue. On Cuthbert's shed, you'll find a microchip gadget. Open it up with L1 and X and take a look to see what's going on in there. Here's the rest of the script ready to go. The conversation has 2 branches. In one, Connie tries to arrest Cuthbert. In the other, she questions him about the stolen candy. Depending on the player's choices, they'll end up at one of these 4 endings. On the left of the microchip, I've left a little space for you to place your dialogue text displayer. This will be the start of Connie and Cuthbert's confrontation. Grab your dialogue gadget with R2 and place it on the microchip. It'll automatically snap to the canvas. To progress the conversation, we need to connect the circle and X outputs to the rest of the dialogue. Create a wire from the circle output port of the dialogue gadget that you created. Extend that wire over to one of the next 2 dialogue gadgets and connect it to the start text input. Now create a wire from the X output port and connect it to the other dialog gadget. Branching dialog logic can get messy, so using microchips is essential if you want to keep a semblance of order to your scene. We now have a complete dialog tree. In the next step, I'll show you how to connect a camera to the dialog. There's one more thing we need to connect to our dialog: a camera. You'll find a spare one on the microchip, but you can edit it or add your own if you want to. Tweak the first dialog text displayer and go to the Inputs and Outputs page. Find the button with a waveform icon. This port is active whenever the text is on screen, which makes it perfect, and go to the Inputs and Outputs page. Find the button with a waveform icon. This port is active whenever the text is on screen, which makes it perfect for triggering a camera. Create a wire from the text active output using R2 or X. Extend the wire over to the camera and connect it to the power port. The dialog is ready to go. We just need to connect it up to the timeline so that it'll activate once the cutscene has finished. The confrontation cutscene has a wire connecting it to a counter gadget. This bit of logic takes the pulse signal from the timeline and turns it into a constant signal to power the microchip. You can learn more about this in the wiring and logic tutorial. To activate the microchip, create a wire from the counter full output on the counter and connect it to the power port of the microchip. Then switch over to play mode and test the dialog. That started off well, but it never reached a satisfying conclusion. So often the way, isn't it? In the next step, I'll show you how you can end the scene with a bang. This showdown between Connie and Cuthbert needs a big finish. On the right side of the microchip are two gadgets. One called Win and one called Lose. You can tell from this icon in the corner that they're both microchips. These microchips contain two cutscenes, one where Connie defeats Cuthbert and one where he sends her packing. Connie and Cuthbert's conversation has 4 possible conclusions. 1 will activate the win ending, the other 3 will lead to the lose ending. Let's start with the win condition. Pick one of the dialogue conclusions. I'm using the one at the bottom. On the right edge of the gadget, you'll see a port with a square stop symbol icon. The port will send a signal when the dialogue text is finished. As there are no dialogue responses set up in these gadgets, they're finished using a close prompt instead. We'll use this port to activate the microchip. Create a wire on the text finished port, then extend it over to the win microchip. Connect the wire to the microchip's power port. Now do the same with the other 3 dialogue conclusions. Except this time, connect them to the power of the lose ending. The stage is now set. The actors are ready. All that's left to do is play the scene and watch the drama unfold. Rewind the scene with L3, then switch over to play mode and see if you and Connie can get the better of Cuthbert.
You might be able to animate wobbly platforms with the action recorder, but keyframes are where animation gets serious. Nice try, Cuthbert, but leave the dream shaping to the experts. We're going to use keyframes to animate the platforms so Connie can reach the exit. A keyframe records any changes you make to an object, such as its position, tweak menu settings, or anything else you can think of. Then it stores those changes in a gadget that you can switch on and off. OK, let's use keyframes to help Connie get across those platforms. First, go to the assembly menu. If it's closed, press the square button to open it. Look for the Animate button, which has a clapperboard icon, and click on that. Start by selecting the keyframe gadget, which is the one with the diamond and the plus sign. Then stamp it in the scene above the first gap. You'll notice there's now a Stop Recording button in the context menu, and your imp now looks like a red keyframe. That means the keyframe gadget is recording any changes you make in the scene. But unlike the action recorder, it only records the state of things, not a period of time. It's probably easier to understand if we put it into practice. Let's try it on the block that's on the ground in front of Connie. Grab it with R2 and place it between the first 2 platforms. You'll see some dashed lines appear on the block. These tell you that the keyframe has recorded the change you've made to the object. You can move it as many times as you like. It'll only store the final result. If that's not the outcome you wanted, you can always undo your last change with the left directional button. The next bit is super important. To finish and store your changes in the keyframe, you need to select the Stop Recording button in the context menu. Select it now and see what happens. That's right. The block has snapped back to its original position. That's because the keyframe isn't active right now. But we can still see what's recorded by selecting the gadget with X. There, the block is back to where you moved it. You'll notice the keyframe doesn't record how things moved, just where they moved to. Make sure you deselect the keyframe before moving on. You can do that by pressing the circle button. In the next step, I'll show you how to use your keyframe in the scene. Now that you've recorded a keyframe, let's look at how to activate it. See the trigger zone above the first platform? Select it with X to check its area of effect. OK, it looks like the zone stretches across the whole gap. Deselect it with the circle button. Then use the sticks or the grab cam to move in closer to the gadget. You'll notice an output port on its side, labelled Detected. This sends a signal when it detects a possessed puppet like Connie. We need to connect this to the keyframe, so select the port with R2 or X to create a wire. Then stretch it to the keyframe gadget with your IMP and use R2 or X to connect the wire to the power port. Now the trigger zone signal will switch on the keyframe when it detects Connie. Try it out in play mode. Just press the Options button and select the controller icon. See? As soon as Connie enters the trigger zone area, the block springs into place. Well, it works okay, but the animation's a bit fast, don't you think? We can do something about that after you take Connie across. Head back into edit mode, rewind time with L3, and I'll show you how to add smoothing to the keyframe in the next step. OK then, we've made a simple keyframe animation. Now it's time to smooth it out and make it look better. Like almost everything in Dreams, keyframes can be tweaked. So open this one's tweak menu, hold L1, then press the square button over it. You'll see two sliders at the bottom, slow power up and slow power down. These determine how long it takes for the keyframe to turn on fully. Hover over the slow power up slider now and hold X. Then move your IMP to the right to increase the value. Let's set it to 1 second for now. You can set slow power down to any value you like. Then close the tweak menu by selecting the cross icon in the corner. Or you can hold L1 over the menu, then press the circle button. Let's see what that looks like in play mode. Ah yes, that looks a lot smoother. If you're happy with the new animation, switch back to edit mode. Rewind time with L3 and move on to the next step. It looks like the bridge across the next gap has collapsed. We could just move it back into place, but where's the fun in that? Let's perform a little bit of magic instead. Go to the Assembly menu and select another keyframe from the Animate menu. Stamp it above the gap with R2 or X. Now see if you can reassemble the bridge. Grab the first part and move it back where it should be. One of the great things about keyframes is that they can affect multiple objects. So you can put the other half of the bridge back too. Then select Stop Recording from the context menu to store your changes. Once recording stops, the bridge will go back to its original position. So, select the keyframe with X if you want to see those changes again. I could have done a better job at positioning the bridge. Nothing to worry about though, because editing a keyframe is easy. Just select the Edit Keyframe button in the context menu. It's got the same icon as a keyframe gadget. This allows you to make changes to the keyframe. You can remove things from a keyframe by pressing the triangle button over them. And now the bridges are back on the ground. Let's put them back into place, but this time, make sure they're a bit straighter. Remember, when you're grabbing things, you can realign them by pressing the triangle button. There we go, much better. You can select Stop Recording again to finish editing this keyframe. Then move on to the next step when your bridge is in place. The bridge's new position is already stored in the keyframe, so all we need now is a way to activate it. That's where this trigger zone will come in handy. Let's select it to see what zone it covers. It's not in the gap this time, it's over this button. First, create a wire from the trigger zone's output using R2 or X. Then stretch it over to the keyframe and connect it to its power port. When Connie steps on the button now, the keyframe will be switched on. But what happens when she leaves the trigger zone? Let's test it in play mode to find out. Just as I thought. When Connie moves away, the keyframe switches off. Let's head back to edit mode and see what we can do about that. Of course, we could just move the trigger zone into the gap, but this is an animation tutorial. So let's see if we can use the keyframe's tweak menu to fix the problem. Open it now with the L1 and square button shortcut and have a look at the options there. Hovering over the buttons will bring up their names. The one we're interested in is called Keep Changes. With this option turned on, any changes made by the animation will be permanent. So once Connie activates the keyframe, the bridge will stay in its new position until you rewind the scene. Since we're already in the tweak menu, let's add some smoothing to that animation. I think I'll set it to 2 seconds this time. Okay, time to close the tweak menu with L1 and the circle button. Then try out these changes in play mode. How's that for a magic trick? You can switch back to edit mode, rewind time, and experiment with the keyframe to see what else you can do. Maybe you could try keyframing a tweak menu setting, or animating some elements from the tutorial collection. When you're done, move on to the next step, and I'll show you how to use keyframes on a timeline. Keyframes are great for making simple animations. But if you want to make something more complex, you need a timeline. See that little block floating between the last two platforms? Let's use keyframes on a timeline to animate it. Start by selecting a timeline from the Animate menu. Stamp it down somewhere around the last gap. Then you can use the circle button to unequip the gadget. Now open the timeline, hold L1 over it and press X. This is the timeline canvas. You can move the canvas with your imp by grabbing it with R2. The numbers along the top are seconds, and you can see it set to 8 seconds by default. If you grab the edges with X, you can extend or shorten the canvas. Try setting it to around 6 seconds. If you ever need extra space to add more things, you can also extend the bottom of the timeline. Once you're comfortable with moving and resizing the timeline canvas, move on to the next step and we'll start adding things to it. Now, it's time to animate the floating block. Get a new keyframe from the Animate menu and stamp it in the scene. Now grab and move the block to its starting position at the edge of the platform where Cuthbert's waiting. Once the block's in place, remember to press the Stop Recording button in the context menu. Now, grab the keyframe gadget and move it over the timeline. The gadget will snap to it. Place it at the very start of the timeline. Then get another keyframe from the Animate menu. We'll use this one to record the block's second position. This time, stamp the keyframe directly onto the timeline. Around the 2-second mark is good, on the same row as the first keyframe. Move the floating block to the opposite side of the gap. Now stop recording. Hover over the timeline canvas and play controls will appear. Using these controls, you can preview just the timeline without playing the rest of the scene. Select the play button to preview your animation. As you can see, gadgets are only active when the timeline's playhead is over them. So, when neither of the keyframes are switched on, the block goes right back to its original position. Now we need to edit the animation so the first keyframe blends into the second. To do that, open the first keyframe's tweak menu with L1 and the square button. Now that the keyframe is on a timeline, the buttons that were grayed out before are available. These are blend types, and they change how one keyframe merges into the next. Select the linear button, which will blend to the next keyframe at a constant speed. If you press the timeline's play button now, you'll see the platform move smoothly between the keyframed positions. Feel free to try out other blend types and see how they affect the animation. Then move on to the next step when you're ready. We've got the platform moving smoothly now, but we can still improve how it works. Let's begin by making it pause for a moment at the start and finish, so Connie has an easier time getting on. All we have to do is scale the keyframes on the timeline, so they last longer. You might want to get up close to the first keyframe before we start. Now, with your imp over the keyframe, hold the up directional button to extend it. Then do the same with the second keyframe. Now that the keyframes are longer, the blend has become quicker. You can see it for yourself by selecting the play button under the timeline. If you want to scale a keyframe more precisely, you can do that with its trim handles. Trim handles are the dotted lines at the beginning and end of keyframes. Grab them now with R2 to give it a try. We should get the platform back to where it started now, but instead of adding a new keyframe, we're going to clone the first one. You remember how to clone things, right? Just hold L1 and grab the first keyframe with R2. Now drag it past the second keyframe and place it by releasing R2. Now we just need to add the blending between the last two keyframes. Only this time, we'll use a shortcut instead of the tweak menu. Just hover over the space between those keyframes, then hold L1 and press X. There you go, one linear blend added. You can even cycle through different blend types by keeping L1 held and pressing X again. I love shortcuts, because I'm lazy. Use the play controls on the timeline to preview the animation. Move on to the final step when you're ready to continue. Now, just snap Frames Tweak menu. The last step is tweaking the timeline itself. So, hold L1 anywhere over it, then press the square button to see all of its properties. The playback speed makes it go faster or slower. But what we're interested in right now is the playback mode. When it's set to once, the whole timeline will play, even if it was only powered for a split second. When it's set to sustain, it will only play when it has constant power. It will stop when it loses power, then resume from that point if it's turned on again. And if it's set to loop, it will repeat over and over as long as it has power. That sounds like the best option for this timeline, so select that one. Okay, it looks like we're good to go. You can close the timeline now by selecting the cross icon in the top right corner. Or you can hold L1 over the timeline itself, then press the circle button.